Imagine you've got a bank account, right? And sitting in this account is, let's say, 100 million euros.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty good problem to have.
Right. On paper, you are extraordinarily wealthy. Your net worth is completely secure. But there is a catch.
There always
Yeah,
is.
exactly. The bank has this strict security protocol, and you are only allowed to withdraw 10 euros a day.
Oh, wow. So you're a millionaire on paper, but
But in the physical reality of trying to, pay your rent or buy groceries or put fuel in your car, you're essentially living in poverty.
that's a brutal reality check.
It really is. And today, we are looking at a text that argues our entire global economy is trapped in that exact scenario with our fundamental energy supply.
I mean, that analogy perfectly captures the whole illusion of modern resource economics.
Right.
We've spent the last century measuring our civilization's wealth by just looking at the total size of the deposit underground.
Right, just looking at the reserves.
Exactly. Completely ignoring the mechanical effort required to actually maintain the flow rate out of that vault.
Well, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. If you're joining us, you are the kind of listener who, looks past the daily churn of these disjointed headlines.
Yeah, you see the supply chain bottlenecks, the inflation, the geopolitical fracturing.
And you want the structural why underneath it all. So our mission today is to thoroughly unpack a really fascinating and honestly somewhat daunting source text.
Definitely sobering, yeah.
It's by a physicist and researcher named Antonio Turiel. The book is called Sin Energia, Pequeña Guía para el Gran Descenso, which translates to Without Energy, a short guide to the Great Descent.
In Turiel, he operates as a scientist at the Spanish National Research Council. So his approach is strictly thermodynamic.
Right, he's not looking at the stock market.
No, not at all. He isn't analyzing market sentiment or, political maneuvering.
Right.
He is looking at the raw physics of extraction and the energetic limits of our industrial infrastructure.
And the central thesis of his work is that humanity is entering the Great Descent, or El Gran Descenso. And I think we need to define this carefully for you guys because popular culture has totally conditioned us to expect, like, a Hollywood apocalypse.
Oh, totally. The whole Mad Max scenario.
Right. But this is not a sudden cinematic collapse where the power grids instantly fry and we all end up bartering for water in a desert.
No. The Great Descent is a prolonged, irreversible, and highly volatile reduction in the net energy and physical materials available to fuel the global economy.
Irreversible being the key word there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference between falling off a cliff and, say, walking down a massive, crumbling staircase in the dark.
That's a great way to put it.
The descent is incremental, sure, but the loss of altitude is permanent. And the framework Turiel provides really challenges the standard narrative that our current global frictions are just temporary hangovers from the pandemic.
Or just isolated policy errors, right. So, okay, let's unpack this. How does Turiel connect this barrage of daily news crises to this one single overarching theory?
Well, he calls them nested crises. When we look at a shortage of semiconductor chips, a sudden spike in fertilizer costs, maybe a war over territorial resources, the media presents them as three separate stories.
Right, totally disconnected.
But Turiel mathematically links them all to the peaking of global fossil fuel extraction.
So the underlying disease is energy depletion, and the crises are just the symptoms.
Exactly, just various organic symptoms. Let's look at the raw production data Turiel presents because, honestly, the synchronization of these numbers is alarming.
Yeah, lay the data on us.
So the global production of all petroleum liquids, and this
Yeah.
includes conventional crude oil, the non-conventional shale oils from fracking, the tar sands, biofuels,
So everything.
everything. It reached its absolute historical maximum in November 2018.
Wait, November 2018? That is way before any pandemic lockdowns artificially suppressed demand?
Yeah, well before. That was the ceiling of human extraction capability. It hit approximately 84.5 million barrels per day.
Okay.
And since that peak, the total volume has contracted by roughly 4%.
4% doesn't sound like a lot, but at that scale, it's massive.
It's massive. And the petroleum decline does not exist in a vacuum. Uranium extraction globally peaked in 2016 and has since dropped by a staggering 24%.
24%, wow.
Yeah. And coal extraction essentially hit a plateau between 2014 and 2019. It's just unable to push past its maximum threshold, despite massive demand from Asia.
So when you aggregate those materials, oil, gas, coal, uranium, you're looking at the literal foundation of the modern world.
Absolutely. They provide 89% of the world's primary energy.
So if they are in a synchronized structural decline, The entire premise of continuous global economic growth mathematically breaks.
Which brings us into direct conflict with mainstream economic theory, right? Specifically, this principle of infinite substitutability.
I love when Turiel tears this down. Explain infinite substitutability for the listener.
Okay, so most economists are trained to view energy as just another interchangeable line item on a ledger. The prevailing theory dictates that if a specific resource, say coal, becomes too expensive to extract, the invisible hand of the free market will just automatically incentivize human ingenuity to find a cheaper substitute.
The assumption is basically that price dictates physical reality. If oil gets scarce, the price goes up, making it profitable to, I don't know, magically invent a new fuel source or suddenly start mining asteroids.
Right, like the market is magic.
Yeah.
But Turiel points out a fatal flaw here, which is that energy is not a standard commodity.
Oh, it's the prerequisite.
Exactly. It's the fundamental prerequisite for the creation and movement of all other commodities, including the substitutes themselves.
You can't replace a high-density energy source with a financial incentive. It violates the laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah, we can look at the concept of ERI for this, energy return on investment.
Let's get into that, yeah.
In the 1930s, for every 1 barrel of oil equivalent in energy you spent drilling a hole in Texas, you got 100 barrels back, 100 to 1 return.
That's incredible.
It was a massive energy surplus. That's what built the middle class, the highway system, modern aviation.
Right. But today,
if you spend energy fracking complex shale rock or drilling thousands of feet underwater, your return might be 15 to 1 or even 5 to 1.
so you are doing significantly more mechanical work to yield less net energy for society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the material failures stemming from that dropping that energy are just playing out in real time.
Yeah, the text provides some wonderfully visceral examples of this. Like, Turiel notes that the physical publishing of this very book, Sin Energia, was delayed by severe paper shortages.
Sweeping the printing industry in 2021 and 2022, yeah.
The irony there is so potent. A book warning about material scarcity is delayed by material scarcity.
You really can't make it up. But he catalogs much more than just paper. He documents critical shortages in structural steel, aluminum smelting, essential plastics.
Because the global factory floor is experiencing structural delays, the sheer energetic cost of processing raw ore into usable industrial metals has just become unmanageable.
Which circles us perfectly back to your bank withdrawal analogy from the start.
Oh, right, the daily limit.
Yeah, we have vast reserves of iron ore and bauxite left in the Earth's crust. But if the daily flow rate of the cheap, high-density energy required to smelt them down slows, the global supply chain just starves.
Because our civilization operates on a continuous, just-in-time flow. We do not consume reserves, we consume production.
Exactly. You can't build a cargo ship out of the potential of iron ore sitting a mile underground.
Yeah.
You need the flow.
And if we look at the specific composition of that dropping flow, Turiel identifies one precise petroleum product that is acting as the primary bottleneck for the entire global system right now.
And it isn't standard gasoline for commuter cars.
No, it's diesel.
Yeah, the author has actually been charting the inevitability of a structural diesel crisis since 2012.
Since 2012.
Yeah. It is an issue of inescapable physical chemistry. To understand the vulnerability, we really have to look at the mechanism of a petroleum refinery.
Right, because you don't just pump crude oil into a vat and push a button to decide you want 100% diesel.
I think a lot of people assume you do, but no. You are dealing with fractional distillation.
You are essentially boiling the crude oil, right? And separating it by the length and weight of its hydrocarbon chains.
Exactly how it works. So you heat the raw crude in this massive distillation column. The lighter, simpler hydrocarbon molecules, which make up gasoline, they boil off quickly and rise to the top of the column.
Okay, because they have shorter carbon chains.
Right. They behave somewhat akin to an alcohol. They're volatile, they ignite easily, but diesel is a heavier fraction.
It's more complex, right?
Much more. It consists of longer, more complex hydrocarbon chains. It behaves more like a thick oil. So from a standard barrel of high-quality conventional crude, a refinery might yield 40 to 60% gasoline.
But how much diesel?
It is physically bound to only produce about 20 to 25% diesel.
Wow, only 25% tops. And the core problem Turiel outlines is that the global barrel, so to speak, is changing.
Yeah, as we exhaust the easy conventional oil fields in places like the Middle East or the North Sea, the global mix is increasingly reliant on non-conventional extraction.
Specifically American shale fracking.
Exactly. And fracked oil, often referred to as light tight oil or condensate, has a very high API gravity, meaning it is incredibly light.
So it yields an abundance of simple gasoline molecules and natural gas liquids, but it's fundamentally deficient in the heavy, complex molecules required to synthesize diesel.
Chemistry simply isn't there in the raw feed. So extracting diesel out of the global aggregate is becoming mechanically and chemically harder.
Which acts as a massive brake on the heavy economy. I mean, think about it. You can run a small sedan on electricity, and you can run it on gasoline.
Sure.
But you cannot run a Caterpillar 797 mining haul truck. You know, a machine that stands 3 stories tall and carries 400 tons of rock rice. You can't run that on a lithium-ion battery or standard unleaded gas.
No, it requires the immense stable energy density of diesel.
So the loss of diesel restricts the mining of raw minerals, the smelting of metals, and most critically, the extraction and processing of the raw materials necessary for chemical fertilizers.
And what's fascinating here is that specific cascade from the fractional distillation column of a refinery directly into the global calorie supply.
It's terrifying. Modern industrial agriculture is entirely reliant on an uninterrupted flow of diesel.
It is the hidden ingredient in every meal. Diesel fuels the massive excavators mining the potash and phosphate.
And while natural gas is primarily used in the Haber-Bosch process to synthesize nitrogen fertilizers, diesel fuels the infrastructure that builds and maintains those chemical plants.
Exactly. Diesel fuels the massive tractors that till the soil, the combined harvesters that reap the grain, and the global maritime fleet that transports that food across oceans.
And Turiel points out that this mechanical fragility in our food supply is colliding with a massive environmental shift.
Right, because humanity is fundamentally leaving the stable climate envelope of the Holocene epoch.
We're entering an era of deep climate instability, meaning severe, multi-year droughts are hitting major agricultural basins exactly when the artificial life support of fertilizers and diesel is becoming scarce.
It creates this vicious compounding effect. You see, chemical fertilizers have allowed us to artificially boost crop yields for decades. We treat the soil essentially as a sterile sponge that simply holds the plant while we inject it with petrochemical nutrients.
That's a grim way to look at it, but it's true.
So if a drought stresses a crop and you concurrently lack the diesel to distribute fertilizer, the yield doesn't just decline slightly.
The biological system collapses.
It collapses, and the text catalogs the immediate present-day reality of this collapse. Turiel points to the burning of bakeries in Iran triggered by acute shortages of subsidized flour.
Oh, wow. And we also see paralyzing bakery strikes in Nigeria, right?
Yeah, due to the soaring cost of imported diesel needed to run the ovens and deliver the goods.
There are severe structural food sourcing crises causing widespread societal chaos in Lebanon and Sri Lanka, too.
And the domino effect the author highlights here is protectionism.
Right. When sovereign nations observe a tightening in the global grain or fertilizer supply, the immediate political reaction is panic and hoarding.
Turiel lists the rapid implementation of export bans. You've got Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and India halting the export of wheat.
Indonesia banning the export of palm oil.
Malaysia suspending chicken exports.
The logical chain here is vital for you guys to map out. A geological shift toward lighter crude oil physically reduces the chemical yield of diesel.
The scarcity of diesel financially restricts the mining of fertilizer inputs.
The lack of fertilizer biologically suppresses global crop yields.
The resulting food scarcity triggers inflation, which politically incentivizes national export bans.
And those bans instantly trigger riots, instability, and regime changes in import-dependent nations. A molecular change at a barrel of oil maps directly onto the collapse of a government half a world away.
It's incredible when you trace it all the way back. And the assumption most people make about resource scarcity is that it just acts as a tax, you know?
Yeah, you assume things simply get more expensive, you adjust your household budget, and life goes on.
But the source text argues that energy scarcity goes far beyond mere price hikes. It leads to structural economic failure.
It drives an inflationary spiral and creates what Turiel describes as broken markets.
To really understand broken markets, we have to examine the concept of the volatility trap. This utilizes research the author cites from economists like James Hamilton.
Okay, lay out the volatility trap.
Basically, the global economy has a strict physical tolerance for energy costs. Historically, if the global price of a barrel of oil sustains a level above $120, the economic engine simply stalls.
Right. Businesses cannot afford freight, consumers lose all discretionary income paying for basic utilities.
And the economy tips into a severe recession.
So the $120 mark acts as an invisible ceiling on human economic activity.
Yes, but the trap is on the floor.
What do you mean?
Well, for the multinational oil conglomerates to extract the difficult, non-conventional oil, we are now reliant on, drilling 2 miles under the ocean floor or hydrofracturing tight shale miles horizontally. The capital expenditure is astronomical.
So the marginal cost of extraction for these new barrels often meets or even exceeds that $120 ceiling.
Exactly. So they are caught in an impossible vice. If they price the oil high enough to cover their massive drilling costs and generate a profit, they instantly trigger a global recession.
And then the recession destroys industrial demand and the price of oil crashes back down below their break-even point.
Right. And the data backing this up is just staggering. The text points out that between 2011 and 2014, global oil prices were historically high, hovering over $100 a barrel.
And the public perception was that the major energy companies were accumulating record profits.
So totally. But according to data from the U.S. Department of Energy, the top 127 oil and gas companies actually operated at a massive deficit.
Wait, really? A deficit?
Yes, bleeding cash at a rate of $110 billion annually during that specific period.
That is wild. They were losing $110 billion every year while selling oil at over $100 a barrel.
Because the cost of complex extraction, hauling millions of gallons of water and sand for fracking, building ultra-deepwater rigs, it was rising faster than the economic ceiling could accommodate.
So, as a direct mathematical consequence, the industry initiated a massive retreat from exploration.
Right. From 2014 to 2017, global upstream investment, meaning the capital deployed to search for and develop new future oil fields, plummeted by 56%.
Which totally clarifies a major geopolitical talking point.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the major fossil fuel executives frequently testify that green regulations, ESG mandates, and climate policies are the sole reasons they are halting investment in new drilling.
And Turiel cuts through that narrative completely.
Yeah, he argues that the industry is quietly abandoning a fundamentally unprofitable, geologically exhausted business model.
And using environmental regulation as a highly convenient public relations smokescreen.
The author is unequivocal on this point. Think about it. If an oil major admits to its shareholders that its core business model is permanently broken due to the insurmountable laws of thermodynamics and geological depletion,
Stock valuation goes to zero overnight.
Exactly. So shifting the blame to regulatory hurdles allows them to manage a controlled financial retreat while protecting their remaining capital.
But the consequences of that retreat for the average citizen are brutal. It manifests as entrenched inflation.
Yeah, the text explores the mechanism of inelastic demand. Because fossil fuels provide roughly 95% of the energy required for global transport, our demand for it is utterly rigid.
Right, you cannot opt out of the energy market. You must heat your home to survive the winter. You must commute to your job to pay your rent.
The food you buy must be transported to the grocery store.
Yeah, so when the underlying cost of that rigid energy requirement skyrockets due to the scarcity dynamics we just discussed, you still pay it.
But you pay it by destroying your purchasing power in every other sector.
Exactly. You stop buying new clothes. You stop eating at restaurants. You cancel software subscriptions. The discretionary economy starves to feed the mandatory energy economy.
And in the late stages of this dynamic, Turiel notes that the markets do not just remain expensive, they actively fragment and exclude participants.
This is where it gets scary. The fundamental promise of a free market is that price discovery will always match a willing buyer with a willing seller.
But in an environment of absolute physical scarcity, that mechanism breaks.
Right. The wealthiest players simply outbid the poorer players indefinitely, completely cutting them off from the resource.
He illustrates this with the global liquefied natural gas, or LNG market.
Yeah, look at Pakistan. They essentially found themselves virtually excluded from acquiring LNG shipments because European nations, desperate to replace piped Russian gas, simply absorbed the entire floating supply at prices a developing nation could never match.
The market didn't find an equilibrium, it just amputated Pakistan from the supply chain.
And we see this exclusion fracturing domestic markets in the developed world as well.
Yeah, the text cites the crisis in the UK, where retail energy providers began outright canceling the service contracts of small businesses.
Providers just ran the algorithms and calculated that small pubs and restaurants simply would not generate enough revenue to cover the projected winter wholesale rates.
The market proactively excluded them. leading to industry forecasts that up to 70% of British pubs could face permanent closure.
And in France, the wholesale electricity futures were pricing in expected spikes of €1,000 per megawatt hour.
That is not inflation, that is structural exclusion. When energy hits that price, a glass factory or a steel mill doesn't charge more for its product, it shuts down the furnace and fires the workers.
So the diagnosis is severe.
Very. We have a dropping flow rate of high-density fuels, a critical bottleneck in heavy diesel, an imperiled food system, and an economic model caught in a volatility trap that is breaking global markets.
And I think the natural reaction for anyone absorbing this diagnosis is to look for the technological exit ramp.
Oh, of course. The prevalent narrative is always, well, fossil fuels are economically volatile, geologically finite, and environmentally destructive. So the solution is simple, right?
We just aggressively execute a 100% transition to solar, wind, and battery storage.
And we maintain our exact current standard of living.
Yeah. But Turiel spends a significant portion of the text dismantling this exact premise, which he refers to as the REI, the Renewable Energy Implementation Plan.
And it is vital to clarify his stance here for you listening, because the author is not anti-renewable energy.
No, not at all. He views harnessing the wind and the sun as absolutely critical to human survival.
His fierce critique is aimed at the scale and the method of the proposed transition.
Exactly. The political promise that we can seamlessly swap out a hyper-dense fossil fuel matrix for an electric renewable matrix without fundamentally shrinking our consumption.
It's an illusion.
It's an illusion based on a profound misunderstanding of physics and material limits.
And the crux of his argument hinges on what he defines as the electrification limit, because the overarching goal of the REI is to build vast arrays of solar and wind to generate electricity.
But Turiel brings up a sobering statistical reality. Globally, electricity only accounts for roughly 20% of the final energy consumed by human civilization.
That is a massive blind spot in public discourse. We view our lives through the lens of our laptops, our lights, and our smartphones, so we assume electricity is the dominant force.
Yeah, but even in a highly developed, service-oriented economy like Spain, electricity usage peaks at about 23.6% of total final energy consumption.
That means nearly 80% of the energy keeping civilization running is not electric.
Exactly. It is direct thermal heat and chemical energy.
It's the massive blast furnaces reducing iron ore into steel, which require intense direct combustion.
It is the immense rotary kilns calcining limestone to manufacture concrete.
It's the chemical synthesis of fertilizers we talked about.
And it's the millions of gallons of high-density liquid fuel burned daily by the maritime shipping fleet and global aviation.
I mean, you cannot run a transoceanic cargo vessel on an extension cord.
Right. And attempting to power an industrial steel forge with electric resistance heating is thermodynamically ruinous.
So Turiel argues that even with massive investment, physical and technical limitations make it nearly impossible to push global electrification past 40 or 50% of the total energy mix.
So what happens? The political class pivots to technological proxies, primarily electric vehicles and green hydrogen, claiming these will bridge the gap for the remaining non-electric sectors.
But Turiel explicitly notes that both technologies are nowhere near capable of operating at the massive global scale required to replace the fossil fuel foundation.
Let's break down the mechanics of the green hydrogen illusion, because it is currently absorbing billions in subsidy capital.
Yeah, the theory is that you take excess renewable electricity from wind turbines, run it through water to split the molecules, which is electrolysis, and capture the hydrogen gas to burn as a clean fuel for heavy industry and transport.
Sounds great on paper, Red. But the problem is the parasitic energy loss dictated by the laws of thermodynamics at every step of that process.
Electrolysis itself is highly inefficient, losing roughly 30% of the energy input just to split the water.
Then, because hydrogen is the lightest element in the universe, it has terrible volumetric energy density.
So to make it useful for transport or storage, you have to compress it to 700 bar. That's immense pressure.
Or chill it to minus 253 degrees Celsius to liquefy it.
And both compression and cryogenic chilling require massive amounts of additional energy.
By the time you actually transport the hydrogen and burn it in a fuel cell or a furnace, the total round-trip energy efficiency is disastrous.
You are expending an enormous amount of high-quality electrical energy to create a highly volatile, difficult-to-store gas, yielding a fraction of the net energy you started with.
It is an energy sink, not a source.
And the material bottleneck for building the actual renewable infrastructure, the turbines and the solar arrays, is colliding directly with the diesel and fossil fuel scarcity we discussed earlier.
Yeah, Turiel highlights an incredible paradox occurring in the corporate sector right now.
Right. Given the global push for transition, you would logically assume that the companies manufacturing wind turbines are generating record profits.
Yet the text notes that major industry-leading wind turbine manufacturers, companies like Vestas, Nordex, and Gamesa, have recently been forced to close factories.
And they have reported losing money on the turbines they are building.
It seems completely counterintuitive until you look at the supply chain. Building a modern 300-foot wind turbine is an exercise in extreme material extraction.
You need hundreds of tons of steel for the tower, massive amounts of fiberglass and balsa wood for the blades,
Rare earth metals like neodymium for the generator magnets.
and thousands of tons of reinforced concrete for the base.
And how are all of those raw materials extracted, processed, and transported?
With diesel.
With diesel. The diesel-powered excavators mine the iron. The coal-fired plants forge the steel. The diesel trucks haul the massive blades across the highway.
Because the underlying fossil fuel matrix is experiencing the volatility trap and rising extraction costs, the cost of the raw materials required to build the green infrastructure has skyrocketed.
Completely wiping out the profit margins of the turbine manufacturers.
So the infrastructure meant to save us from fossil fuel depletion is entirely dependent on cheap fossil fuels to be built.
We are trying to build the lifeboats out of the wood from the sinking ship, but the mechanical effort to rip the wood off the deck is exceeding our capacity.
That is a brilliant analogy. And as the reality of this material bottleneck sets in, nations are recognizing that the remaining high-quality reserves are shrinking.
Which brings Turiel to a very dark consequence of this descent: the dangerous rise in militarization.
Yeah, as the energetic pie shrinks, nations abandon market diplomacy and rely increasingly on military force to secure the remaining slice.
He uses Libya as a tragic, prime example of how militarism actually accelerates the descent.
Explain the Libya example.
Well, Libya possesses some of the highest quality, easiest to refine crude oil on the planet. It is exactly the type of light, sweet crude the global market desperately wants.
However, following the military interventions and subsequent civil war starting in 2011, the country fractured into competing fiefdoms.
The result was highly volatile, unreliable production that, by 2022, had virtually stopped flowing into the global export market in any meaningful, sustained way.
Because you cannot operate complex extraction infrastructure in a war zone.
Turiel emphasizes this strongly. A modern oil refinery or a deepwater drilling operation is a hyper-delicate, multi-billion-dollar symphony of precise engineering, continuous chemical inputs, and highly trained personnel.
It requires absolute societal stability to function.
Exactly. Militarism, bombing campaigns, and armed factions fighting over pipelines are the exact antithesis of that stability. Using the military to secure energy resources ironically destroys the complex infrastructure required to extract them.
It's totally self-defeating. And the systemic fragility, the drop in baseload fossil fuels combined with the immense difficulty of scaling renewables explains why there is suddenly a very real, palpable fear in Europe regarding El Gran Apagón, or the Great Blackout.
Oh, yeah. The official governmental warnings issued in countries like Austria, Germany, and Switzerland, preparing citizens for potential multi-day grid failures, they are not born of paranoia.
No, they are grounded in grid physics. The legacy electrical grid was designed a century ago around the concept of concentrated, highly controllable, on-demand power.
You burn coal or gas to spin a massive, heavy physical turbine. The sheer weight and momentum of those spinning turbines provide grid inertia, physically stabilizing the frequency of the electricity.
But the REI model attempts to force scattered, highly variable, inverter-based renewable energy into that legacy grid. Solar panels and wind turbines don't have those massive, heavy spinning generators.
So as you drop the fossil fuel baseload and increase the variable renewable load, the grid loses its physical inertia.
Balancing the exact millisecond by millisecond supply and demand becomes incredibly fragile.
Yeah, a sudden drop in wind across the North Sea, combined with a natural gas shortage, can trigger cascading frequency failures that bring down the entire continental grid.
Man, we have spent the first half of this deep dive outlining a profoundly challenging reality. We have diagnosed a terminal drop in energy flow, a chemical bottleneck crippling the heavy economy and the food supply, inflationary exclusion, and the physical impossibility of maintaining our current consumption model via green technology.
Right. And if we stop the analysis here, the logical conclusion is just nihilism.
Which is exactly why Turiel pivots so forcefully in the latter half of Sin Energia. He does not write to induce paralysis, he writes to force a structural change in human behavior.
Yeah. He provides an extensive, mathematically grounded playbook for navigating the Great Descent.
So the narrative shifts from identifying the failure to engineering the adaptation. And his core argument for the path forward requires a complete paradigm shift regarding what we actually value.
Because Turiel asserts that the ultimate threat to human survival is not actually a lack of physical resources. The Earth still provides a massive flow of solar energy, wind, and remaining materials.
The fatal flaw is a socioeconomic operating system that is pathologically obsessed with infinite, compounding growth on a geologically finite planet.
And it is important to note here that we are strictly reporting the author's analysis, maintaining complete neutrality on political ideologies.
Absolutely, yeah. Turiel applies his thermodynamic critique equally across historical economic systems.
He argues that both consumer capitalism and industrial communism have historically failed to respect planetary boundaries, because both models fundamentally rely on continuous industrial expansion and the endless extraction of raw materials to maintain societal stability.
Because any system that requires infinite growth will eventually hit the physical limits of the container it operates within. Therefore, Turiel's theoretical framework for survival is based on the concept of democratic degrowth, or decrecimiento democrático.
Now, degrowth is a term that instantly triggers defensive reactions because people associate it with forced poverty.
So break down what he actually means by this.
We have to contrast it with the alternative. If we ignore the physics of the descent and try to maintain the growth model, the market will eventually execute the degrowth for us.
That looks like the volatility trap we discussed. Chaotic, brutal exclusion where the poorest starve and basic goods become unaffordable.
Right. That is forced austerity. Democratic degrowth is the conscious, planned, and equitable reduction of our total societal metabolic footprint.
It is rationally deciding to use less total energy and fewer raw materials while redesigning our systems to ensure basic needs are met for everyone.
It is the argument that we can shrink our energy consumption while simultaneously increasing the actual quality of human life.
By shifting our focus from producing disposable consumer goods to investing in community resilience, durable infrastructure, and actual human time.
And Turiel provides very specific, actionable focus areas to achieve this reduction. Let's look at the immense inefficiencies he targets, starting with the logistics of the fossil fuel industry itself.
Yeah, this is action one. Stop transporting fossil fuels. If the physics dictate we have less energy flow, the immediate question is where we are wasting the current flow.
And Turiel points out a staggering, almost absurd inefficiency in our current model. Roughly 40% of all the oil consumed globally is burned strictly for the purpose of extracting, refining, and transporting fossil fuels.
The sheer logistical footprint of the industry is an energy sink. Think about the life cycle of a barrel of oil.
You burn diesel to run the drilling rig. You burn massive amounts of energy to run the complex fractional distillation at the refinery.
Then you load that refined fuel onto immense maritime supertankers that burn thousands of tons of heavy bunker fuel just across the ocean.
Then you pump it into pipelines requiring massive electrical compression stations and finally load it into diesel tanker trucks to deliver it to a local gas station.
It is a snake eating its own tail. Turiel points out that if we aggressively localize our economies and simply stop transporting heavy liquids across oceans to fuel superfluous globalized trade, our primary energy needs drop instantly by 13% overall.
That is a massive chunk of the energy deficit solved simply by shrinking the geographic radius of our supply chains.
And if we are localizing our fuel, the logical next step, and his second major action area, is localizing what that fuel currently grows, which is our food.
We discussed the terror of the fertilizer and diesel bottlenecks. But Turiel notes that we do not actually have a raw calorie production problem.
No, we have a gross mismanagement problem. Right now, approximately 30% of all food produced globally is wasted before it is ever consumed.
The caloric loss is immense. Food rots in transcontinental shipping containers. It is discarded by supermarket algorithms demanding cosmetic perfection, or it simply spoils in the field because the globalized pricing structure makes it unprofitable to harvest.
The action here is to rebuild localized regional food webs. If the food doesn't have to travel 3,000 miles on a diesel truck, it doesn't rot in transit, and you don't burn the fuel.
But he also argues we can drastically reduce our reliance on the chemical fertilizers that are currently bottlenecked by natural gas prices.
Yeah, Turiel advocates for a rapid pivot to regenerative agriculture.
We discussed earlier how the Haber-Bosch process uses immense energy to synthesize nitrogen from the air and apply it artificially to sterile soil. Regenerative agriculture changes the biological mechanism.
By utilizing intelligent crop rotation, for example, planting legumes that naturally host bacteria capable of pulling nitrogen directly out of the atmosphere and fixing it into the root systems, you are essentially building an organic battery of nutrients.
You're utilizing the existing biological technology of the soil microbiome instead of building a multi-billion-dollar petrochemical plant to do the exact same job.
And it builds soil carbon, which vastly increases water retention, providing a natural buffer against the climate change droughts he warned about earlier.
So moving from the fields to the cities, Turiel targets the physical layout of modern life. His third major action area focuses on limiting the private vehicle.
He cites data specific to Spain, noting that 25% of all the oil consumed in the country is burned strictly in private cars.
Another 25 to 30% is consumed by road freight.
Over half the oil imported into the nation is simply rolling rubber tires on asphalt.
The energetic cost of moving a 2-ton metal box to transport a single human being across a city is mathematically unjustifiable in the Great Descent.
Turiel argues for a radical triage of our fuel use. We must redesign our urban spaces to prioritize walkable infrastructure, electric public transit, and bicycles.
We triage the remaining fuel for essential societal functions, ambulances, agricultural tractors, emergency services, and necessary heavy industry, not sitting idle in commuter traffic jams or shipping identical plastic consumer goods back and forth across the continent via superfluous road freight.
He argues that taking this step alone buys us a decade of time. It provides a 10-year energy buffer to restructure the rest of society.
The fourth action area directly confronts the psychology of the modern consumer, specifically the disaster of fast fashion.
The energetic statistics here are culturally embarrassing. Turiel notes that the average person in Spain consumes 30 kilograms of new clothing every single year.
He demands an immediate societal effort to drop this consumption by at least 10 to 20%. And to drive the point home, he uses a haunting visual, the Atacama Desert in Chile.
Oh, yeah. The Atacama has become the global graveyard for the fast fashion industry. There are literally mountains, thousands of tons of discarded, sometimes entirely unworn clothing piled up in the arid desert landscape.
If we trace the energetic life cycle of those garments, it is an atrocity. You extract petroleum to synthesize the polyester fibers, or burn immense amounts of diesel and pump scarce water to grow conventional cotton.
You ship those raw materials to factories in Asia powered by coal. You manufacture cheap garments designed to fall apart, ship them across the Pacific on bunker fuel supertankers to retail stores in Europe or North America,
where they are worn, perhaps 3 times, discarded, and then shipped again to South America to be dumped in a desert.
By abandoning the aggressive marketing cycles of fast fashion and returning to the production of high-quality, durable clothing meant to last for years, we reclaim a vast amount of energy, water, and raw petrochemicals.
Which leads perfectly into his final and perhaps most structurally profound action area, the total abolition of planned obsolescence.
Turiel possesses a unique perspective here, drawing on his own professional background working in conjunction with the European Space Agency, the ESA.
Because the engineering parameters for deep space are entirely different from the parameters of a consumer electronics store.
Right. If you send a multi-billion-dollar satellite or a scientific probe to orbit Jupiter, you cannot dispatch a repair technician if a single circuit board fries or a capacitor blows.
Precisely. The text notes that the technology sent into the vacuum of space is engineered to be virtually eternal.
The engineers utilize solid-state components, robust thermal management systems, and redundant architectures to ensure the hardware can withstand extreme radiation, massive temperature fluctuations, and continuous operation for decades without ever failing.
The knowledge exists right now to engineer a washing machine, a refrigerator, or a smartphone that will operate flawlessly for 50 years.
We possess the thermodynamic and material knowledge. We simply choose not to utilize it in the consumer market.
Corporations intentionally design components with weak thermal limits or proprietary software locks, planned obsolescence, guaranteeing the product will fail within a few years.
This forces the consumer to purchase a replacement, continually feeding the infinite growth model and accelerating the depletion of rare earth metals and energy.
Turiel argues that society must legally mandate extreme longevity for manufactured goods. We must ban the intentional degradation of products.
And crucially, we must prioritize the reuse and repair of these items over mere recycling.
There is an important thermodynamic distinction there. Recycling still requires a massive energy input. You have to physically collect the glass or the aluminum, heat the furnaces to thousands of degrees to melt the material down, and remanufacture it.
Repairing a component requires a fraction of that energy.
He even suggests we need a total psychological reframing of how we view our industrial waste.
Scrapyards and landfills should no longer be viewed as trash dumps. They must be recategorized as high-quality, concentrated resource mines for the future.
Full of refined copper, steel, and rare elements that we simply cannot afford the energy to pull out of virgin rock anymore.
So if we synthesize this entire playbook, localizing the food supply through regenerative agriculture, abandoning the private vehicle for mass transit, ending the energetic sink of fast fashion, and mandating immortal space-grade appliances, we drastically shrink the metabolic footprint of our civilization.
And Turiel points to mathematical modeling to prove this isn't just an aesthetic fantasy. He cites studies, specifically the work by researcher Joel Millward Hopkins and his colleagues, which analyzed the absolute minimum energy requirements for human well-being.
The findings of that study are stunning. They calculated that by deploying maximum efficiency technologies and eliminating the structural waste of the growth economy, humanity could maintain a comfortable, highly developed standard of living, including quality healthcare, education, and modern comforts, using only 1/10 of the current per capita energy consumption typical of the developed world.
1/10. We could drop our raw energy throughput by 90% and still live deeply fulfilling, secure lives.
Simply by excising the pathological inefficiencies of a system that burns half its fuel just driving in circles to keep the economic numbers inflating.
It proves that the Great Descent is a boundary, but it does not have to be a tragedy.
The transition will be undeniably difficult. The volatility trap will continue to break markets, and the physical limits of extraction will force severe changes to the heavy economy.
But the actual blueprint for survival relies entirely on existing technology and a rational reorganization of our priorities. We do not need a miraculous new fusion reactor. We need democratic degrowth.
Turiel's Sin Energia strips away the comforting illusions of infinite substitutability and green tech utopianism, but replaces them with something far more robust, which is agency.
The descent is happening, but the manner in which we walk down those stairs is entirely up to us.
Absolutely. To close out this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought experiment drawn directly from Turiel's insights regarding the European Space Agency.
I love this part.
We surround ourselves with incredibly fragile machinery, accepting failure as a normal part of consumer life. But imagine for a moment that tomorrow, legislation was passed requiring every single appliance in your home, your microwave, your laptop, your water heater, to be engineered to exact space-grade specifications.
Imagine a world where you purchase a high-end blender, and because it is built with solid-state immortality, it never breaks.
You use it for 50 years, and then you pass it down to your grandchildren.
Yes. That paradigm shift would instantly shatter the modern consumer economy. It would bankrupt companies that rely on selling you the exact same cheap plastic item every 3 years.
The GDP metrics would plummet. But in the reality of the Great Descent, where raw energy and materials are the most precious currencies we have, that destruction of the disposable economy might be the exact mechanism that saves the planet.
Something to think about the next time you find yourself standing in a retail store, looking at an aisle of appliances engineered to fail.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration helps you view the daily headlines, the shifting supply chains, and your own everyday energy consumption through a new thermodynamic lens. Until next time.